And welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking, and great to have you along for another episode of Classic Fights. We've got another ripper for you this week. I'd like to bring in my co-host, as always, Grant Tazzy Brown, Pistol Pete Maniatis, and Mike Altamura. How are we, guys? We'll start with you up the top there, Tazzy.
Good, thanks, Lyndon.
All good, mate?
Good, thanks, mate.
What about you,
All
Pete?
good,
How you going on?
All good, Lyndon, and all good, Mike. We're ready to go.
Good stuff. And Mike, all happening for you these days, isn't it? You're off pretty soon again, I think, you said?
Yeah, in about 3 or 4 weeks, you're going to lose me. So, I don't know, maybe your ratings will go back up again then.
Maybe. Well, just coincidence, but they've definitely gone up, mate. So you obviously know a few people out there. And about time they say that we have someone on the show that knows what they're talking about. That seems to be the common thread. Tazzy, that can't be right, can it?
Oh.
No, it's all good. So, look, big one tonight, guys. I can't remember who... it was Pete. Did you choose this one?
Yes.
All right, Pete. Spill the beans. Who have you got? It's a big one.
None other than Cassius Clay. Well, he was known as Cassius Clay back then. Obviously, now we know him as Muhammad Ali. But this was a big test for Cassius Clay. I mean, he'd won a gold medal, the 60 in Rome. Sonny Liston at the time was a bad man. He beat up police, he beat up gangsters, he beat up anyone that was in front of him. It was like a Mike Tyson figure, but in the 60s. He was the first WBC world champion, and he did that in devastating fashion by knocking out Floyd Patterson in one round. He was that devastating. So at the time, this was deemed as really the beating that Cassius Clay was meant to take for having a big mouth. A lot of the punters, a lot of the people were supporting Sonny Liston going into it. Let's just say the colourful figures or mafia, whichever way you want to call it, they bet truckloads on Sonny on this fight. This was a fight, his coming out party. But you go through the form and, Sonny Liston, 6 foot, I think he was.
6'1", I think.
6'1". And he was fighting smaller guys. Most of his opponents were around 200 pounds or lighter. And this is the first time he's come up against someone 6'3", an athlete. It was just really the peak of his powers. I mean, even though I think he was only 23 years of age at the time, he was just at the peak of his powers physically, mentally, and confidence-wise as well. He was beaming. I mean, before the fight, they felt all that chatter that Cassius Clay was doing because he was so petrified that he was going to get beaten up, and he was just talking too much. And I actually had a physical examination. I had the doctor there, and he was next to Sonny Liston, and I thought his heart rate would be, astronomical because he's pulling his pants, and it was dead calm. It was under 40, they said. So that's the greatness of the man. Can shoot his mouth off and sit there as calm as a rattlesnake right next to his opponent. And that's what made him a great, not fighter, but a great man as well.
Yeah, Tazzy, you're a Sonny Liston man. We've had that on previous episodes. He was definitely just... as Pete said, then he was compared to the Mike Tyson of his day, but he probably was even more fearsome than what Tyson was back then, wasn't he?
Yeah, but I mean, to let the record straight, Muhammad Ali's my favourite boxer in person of all time. I mean, outside my father, Muhammad Ali's probably the greatest other man I've ever loved. Ali, like a lot of people, inspired me into boxing and what he done outside of boxing for his beliefs. But look, I've always had a thing for Liston because my father always, loved Liston, and we sort of believed that, we never knew how good he was. I mean, first of all, we never knew his age. I mean, I reckon he's a lot older than what he really was. There was no birth record back then. And he grew up pretty tough, obviously copping buildings from his dad, and he ran away at a young age. And everyone knows about Liston's history, that he got involved in the crime early. I mean, he was on the other side of the law, you could say. And I think the police back then were very, very racial as well, and they used to go to their way to try and, have a go at him. And he was a strong man. He used to beat a lot of them up, which you can't do. So I think he got run out of St. Louis, and then he went to, I think it was to Philadelphia. And, back then too, a lot of people don't know, and I'm sure they don't know, and please do your research, how big a part the mafia, the Italian mafia, played in boxing back then. If you don't think the Italian mafia played a part in boxing back then, you're an idiot and you don't know enough about boxing, because the mafia did play a massive part in all-day life back then, from store owners, the shopkeeper, all pay protection. The same in boxing, especially in New York, where the 5 families were. Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palamo run the boxing. So back then, to get a title shot like Jake LaMotta, etc., you had to play ball. The only one that was a bit bigger than the mafia was Sugar Ray Robertson. He was like the Floyd Mayweather of today's boxing. He was that big. The mafia really couldn't control him. Anyone else they did, and they were involved with Liston. Now, they backed Liston for a while. I believe later on they got rid of Liston. I believe that he was murdered by him. That's my true belief. For not throwing a fight. And we'll never know how good Liston was. Wins over Cleveland Williams, Zora Foley, Floyd Patterson destroyed these guys. They all got shots against Ali later. So I mean, he was a machine, and I really would like people to research more about how great Liston was, because we'll never really know for sure. But he was a Mike Tyson, George Foreman of that era. They looked up to him.
Pete, you want to say something before we get to Mike?
Cleveland Williams was only an average heavyweight. He was nothing. And
got a shot against Ali after.
Go through Cleveland's record. Tell me what he's done. Go over it. That 12, 13 losses. Tell me who we beat. It was of note. Tell me. Tell me. Let's go. All right. Well, you mentioned.
Against Ali after. Listen, and knocked him out.
Yeah, he went 4 rounds. He went 3 or 4 rounds with Ali.
But he got the shot still.
Yeah, but you said notable wins. So, I mean, he's an opponent that goes 3 or 4 rounds. And then, we mentioned a few other guys there, but they were very small heavyweights. They were under 200
So what are you trying to say, Peter? Are you trying to say Liston couldn't fight at all?
No, I'm trying to say he was in an era where, you came along in that era where there was really no one there, and he was beating everyone up that was there, and that's all he could do. That's all he could do, and that's fair enough. But then you run into a CASSIUS Clay, who's a different beast, and you really see where he's really at, which was nowhere near the mark of being with a great. Because
I'm not gonna degrade Ali's win, but Liston, we don't know how old he was. He was fucking old. As I said, he came up against the great Ali.
Well, we're not here to debate the actual.
No, but I just want to know. But I want to get this clear.
Yeah.
Peter, are you saying Liston wasn't a top 10 heavyweight? Is that what you're saying?
Of all time?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't have him in my top 10. Nowhere near.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No, nowhere near.
Look,
wow.
You mentioned the guys that he beat. Where does that? How does that rate him anywhere
near?
There's
a lot more.
We can go over that a bit later. We're not sort of here to debate the credentials of each guy. We're here to talk about the fight itself.
We'll talk about the fight.
Yeah.
But I don't believe Liston. I think he deserves a bit more respect on his name.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what Mike's got to say about this.
Yeah, Mike, we'll set the scene for us. You're obviously a historian when it comes to boxing. Set the scene for us. As Tuzzy said, we probably don't know a lot about Liston, but we know a lot about Ali. Out of the Olympics, is obviously involved in the Nation of Islam and with Malcolm X, and there's a lot of things going on. Set the scene for the fight for us. Back in February 25, 1964 was the date.
Yeah, well, I'm going to touch on saying that both gentlemen were just disagreeing over and put it in context. So I understand what Pete's saying, that on the overall scheme of heavyweights, historically, perhaps Cleveland Williams is a little bit overrated. But if you look at the context of back then, 2 years after Liston stopped him, Cleveland Williams defeated Ernie Terrell, who was a future heavyweight world champion. Mm-hmm. Now, we only won a version of the fragmented heavyweight world title, but it was still a heavyweight world title. Terrell was legitimate top 3 or 4 in the weight class. So to me, that reflects that Williams was a terrific fighter. Now, in terms of Sonny Liston, and I think this plays into what Tazzy's saying, Sonny wasn't just beating these guys, he was destroying these guys. Like, he bombed out Nino Valdez like no one else had. Nino Valdez was a terrific Cuban heavyweight, and maybe Sonny got him towards the end of his career, but still we bombed him out. In Sonny's 5th and 6th fight, he beat Johnny Summerlin, who was a heavyweight fringe contender, top 5 to top 15 for the better part of about 15 years. And what it was with Sonny, I mean, Sonny got out slicked early in his career by Marty Marshall. Twice he avenged that.
Got a broken jaw.
Yeah, that's correct. But what I think Sonny's best attribute was in that era, when you really look at it, is he ducked nobody. And you put into context wins, and we know Ali later went on to beat Cleveland Williams, but this will give you a context. Sonny knocked out Cleveland Williams twice in the second round, third round. Cleveland Williams beat Sonny Banks. Sonny Banks knocked down Ali quite heavily, first knockdown of Ali's career. Ali, going into this bout, there was a lot of questions on him. He hadn't set the world on fire in certain contests. There was the controversy with the glove tear after getting shook by Henry Cooper in the 4th round. There was a controversy with the Doug Jones decision, which you go and watch all these years later, and it's near impossible to card that for Ali. And I think that, and this plays into the greatness of Muhammad, which we'll talk about later, all the question marks were valid going in, because if you look at the heavyweight division historically, going back to the days from the Marcus Aquims through to modern day rules, there'd never been a heavyweight champion who had moved and was fleet-footed and would box and move and pick their spots. Heavyweights were expected to hold their feet and throw down, and Muhammad didn't play into what the typical heavyweight was in that time. So a lot of those people in the game just figured he's not going to have the power, his chin's not going to hold up. Now, the one question mark that I'll look at going into this fight is, with the exception of a 12-round decision over Eddie Machen, who was a heavyweight contender through the 60s as well, Sonny had never really been pressed his last 20, 25 fights in anything over the distance. So the question mark was, if Ali can get him past 4, 5, 6 rounds, what kind of reserves is Sonny going to have past that point? Now, to play into how much the boxing fans at the time wrote off Muhammad, Sonny was an 8-1 favorite, and most anticipated that he would finish the fight inside 3 to 4 rounds. So I think that, as they say, if you want to become a star, you have to have a star-making opportunity and a star-making performance, and this was the opportunity for Ali.
One question, Mike. One question. So, to back my argument, do you agree Sonny Liston was a great heavyweight?
I think he was a great heavyweight. You remember from our top 10 of all time, I didn't have him in my top 10, but I would have him top 15 without question.
Because
and I can see some of the validity of what you're arguing. The only thing I'll say is, true to what Pete said, there's just a little bit of a lack of depth on the record. Outside of the 2 wins over Floyd Patterson, there's a lack of depth of another great win, which would cement him in the top 10.
A bit like Mike Tyson or a Klitschko. Sometimes haven't got good eras, but I did kick Peter's ass pretty bad last week, so he's probably a bit shooken up. So I'm expecting a bit of fire from Peter, because he's had 3 ass kickings in a row.
I think that
rematch Thursday, Tassie.
I think the difference, though, with Mike, what you're saying, though, is, in my opinion, and I'm a bit of, as you know, we had this argument with about Tyson back in the day, because I had him in my top 10. But I think the difference with Tyson compared to, say, listen, I'm not saying one was better than the other, but at least with Tyson, he actually did clean out the entire division. Now, I know he faded badly in his career, but he actually did.
He had 1 belt. There was 1 belt.
Sorry?
There were 3 belts back then.
2 belts. WBA, WBC this fight was for. So it was 2 belts.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that, and it's not all Liston's fault, because at the end of the day, circumstances happen. He's under control of mob. But as I said, I'll just say for Tyson, in my opinion, that he did actually clean out the entire division and unified all 3 belts. And that's why I always had him a little bit higher than Liston. But, sorry, Pete.
So let's paint the picture. Back in those days, the world was centred around the heavyweight champion of the world, and there was only 1 heavyweight. We saw Marciano retire, then Uberga Johansson came on and won, and Marciano said, I'm going to make a comeback because I want the title back into America. He went in a training camp, it wasn't there, he quit. Floyd Patterson came along, trained by the great Gus Tomato. And Floyd Patterson was a brilliant fighter. He had heart, he had everything, but he wasn't really a big guy. And then we saw Sonny Liston take him apart in 63 in one round. I mean, this fight was a year later against Muhammad Ali. You can't say we don't know his date of birth. You can't deteriorate in 1 year when you haven't had a fight and you haven't been beaten up. The truth of the matter is, and this is the truth of the matter, we saw a freak. Muhammad Ali is a freak. Athlete,
I'm not doubting that.
Backs it up, does it. I mean, he had Malcolm X in his corner. He was making a political statement. Before the fight, they wouldn't let him have any water. They kept switching around his bottles because Liston's people were going to try anything. They were going to try and spike his drinks. They put tarnet on the gloves. Ali couldn't see for 2 rounds. He danced around for 2 rounds and said to Angelo Dundee, I'm out of here. Cut my gloves. I'm out. He couldn't see. So he fought blind for 2 rounds till he could get his vision back. We're talking about a freak. It's simple.
100%.
Yeah.
I love Ali.
Well, before we'll get Mike to comment on that as well. We'll get the
I'm saying I want Liston's his name to have a bit more respect on it. That's what I'm saying.
yeah. Mike, what do you have to say about that?
About which point in particular? They made a lot of points.
There's a few points there. Well, firstly, we'll just get off the argument of where Liston rates in the scheme of things, but just tell us a little bit about the background, like of both fighters coming into it. Muhammad Ali, as I said before, had come off the Olympic gold medal. He was 19-0 with 15 KOs. Had come off that very tough, I suppose, controversial win over Henry Cooper, where Sonny Liston had obviously come off the 2 first-round knockouts of Floyd Patterson. So just explain the, I suppose, the fan and media's point of view about what was going to happen in the fight.
1 second.
Yeah, well, like I said, a lot of people were predicting an early round stoppage for Liston. Ali had said all in the lead up that he was going to make the big ugly bear miss a lot and frustrate him and dance on his toes and box rings around him. But like I said, Ali, the greatness of Ali hadn't come to the forefront yet. So fresh in people's mind was the controversy over Doug Jones. Fresh in their mind was Henry Cooper and Sonny Banks knocking him down, fighters that weren't regarded anywhere near the puncher that Liston was. One thing that I think went largely overlooked was Liston's 3 previous fights were all 1-round jobs, twice with Patterson and also with Westall. And he had only had 3 rounds in just over 3 years. So, I mean, if you look at, from what we all understand about boxing and timing and that, Ali had a lot of tough bruising fights, but he was still young. He's only 22 here, and he's fresh enough to come in and be well-conditioned, have his timing. They also reckon that Sonny Liston didn't train particularly hard, that his camp was immersed with prostitutes. He had come in at what was considered a high weight for him at 219 pounds and a little bit soft, but I don't think you can take away from what Ali was able to come out and accomplish in this fight. I think that you see even here, Ali just moving, just trying to get his rhythm, frustrate him, but that hand speed, it's something, you go through all of Liston's record, and I know hindsight's 2020, but Liston never fought anybody with that kind of hand speed in all his fights. I mean, Floyd Patterson was very fast, but when he got hit early in both fights, he stayed hit. He never had a chance to get his hands off.
Tazzy, you wanted to say something before Mike started talking there. We were sort of talking over there. What do you have to say?
Yeah, no, it's all right. But in Peter's opinion, St. Liston wouldn't even win the Victorian State title. He probably wouldn't have even beat Big Bob Moronivic. But I can't believe
it. Yeah, but Tazzy, you never won a world title yourself. We're both in the same boat. We're both fans of this sport. What I'm trying to say is, I'd probably back Sonny Liston to beat Mike Tyson. I'm not backing Sonny Liston. But we're talking about Sonny Liston up against Muhammad Ali. It's a completely different story. We're not talking Sonny Liston up against Mike Tyson. You need to get the thing straight. Sonny Liston was a beast. I'm not bagging Sonny Liston. I'm talking about Sonny Liston versus CASSIUS Clay.
Okay. Well, I thought you was bagging him, so all right, I'll let that go.
I'd probably back him against Tyson.
Come on, Pete.
He would kill
What's
Tyson.
that?
He killed Tyson.
We're not. That's for another episode, guys. I think we might have to have a revisit of the.
Tyson would have
of the top 10.
Lyndon, dream fights, Tyson versus Sonny Liston.
No way. That would be a bloodbath. From our point of view, I mean. It'd the fights between us would be better than the fight itself, I think.
But look at Ali's movement.
Wayne Ryan versus Marvin Hagler.
Pete.
I'm going to just say, look at Ali's movement. I mean, some of Liston's punches are missing by 30 centimetres. You know, this guy, he wouldn't have seen this type of movement and the counter punching that Ali's doing, the speed.
Right.
No one's seen that. Don't worry about Liston. No one would have seen that. I mean, Cassius Clay there beats anyone.
Yeah,
Beats
I
anyone.
agree with that.
It was a strange fight, wasn't it, Mike? Because I watched it again in the lead up to this, and I hadn't seen it for quite a few years, but I must admit it was actually a little bit closer than what I thought. I mean, the judges actually at the time had it 4 rounds to 2 for Ali, one had it 4 rounds to 2 for Liston, surprisingly, the other one had it 3-all. Do you actually remember Ali actually being dominant, but Liston did have his moments?
He did, but I think that, especially when we roll around to round 6, you'll see that. I think with each passing round, Ali was taking a little bit more venom out of Liston. And like I said, them 3 rounds in 3 years, the lack of real hard, tough 10, 12 round conditioning throughout the duration of his career, I think that that's all what was about to come to the forefront in Liston. You know, Ali, I mean, look, there's nothing like youth, especially disciplined youth. And to Pete's point just before, I mean, Ali's moving beautiful and fluid here, but it's not like he's running or bouncing around or anything. It's a very, very measured, very meaningful movement. You see they're working off the jab, controlling, dictating the pace, dictating the range. It's very, very frustrating to encounter a style like that and think that you've got to try and march that down for 15 rounds.
Yeah, of course, 15 rounds. Yeah, no, for sure. It's probably intangible that we don't sort of grasp these days. But Tassie, this was round 4 where the controversy was with the liniment in the eyes. And was it in between rounds here, or was it actually this round?
I think this round, But look, going back to Ali, I mean, as I said, you know, he's the greatest boxer of all time. He could move and punch at the same time, and heavyweights in a move like Ali. So anyone that had that flat-footed style like Liston or Patterson or anyone, look, before the war, before the time he had off, which was about 3+ years, no one beats Ali. The Ali that moves against Liston and everyone in that time, before the war, Joe Fraser wouldn't have got near him. He wouldn't have had 3 half fights with Fraser, I'll tell you now. Because he lost his feet, he lost his legs. The Ali I know didn't stand or lay on the ropes like he did against Foreman and Fraser. This Ali, before the Vietnam War, is the greatest heavyweight of all time. No one touches him.
Pete, do you agree with that?
Yeah, and look, you could just see he's had his eyes washed out there and he's starting to be able to get a little bit of focus. But you notice before that Sonny Liston was bruising up around the face, because Sonny Liston was used to going 1 round and not being hit. This time he's getting smacked, his face is bruising up, he's losing condition. Everyone knows when you cop shots, you don't only get hurt, but you lose condition as well. So he's starting to slow down. And normally by this time of the night, he's celebrating. He ain't in the 5th round. He's not used to doing this. So he's got Ali here, and probably also when he noticed that Ali's eyes had cleared up and he started to box pretty good. You can see Ali moving now, he can't focus. It would have been a horrible time for Ali to be in the ring or Cassius Clay and not being able to focus and have someone like Sonny Liston who's a beast in front of you and you can't see. Imagine how scary these moments would have been for Ali, that he has to hang on and he can't focus and he has to really wait for his eyesight to come back. And that's in the days where the officiating wasn't as good. You could put some ointment on your gloves. Obviously, I mean, Sonny Liston was with a mob. Of course, they're going to try every trick in a book. They're going to spike your drink. They're going to put ointment on your gloves. They're going to try everything. They'll put a horseshoe in their gloves if it needs. You're going to have to win. So Ali's coming in there and he's riding the storm. And that's what someone as great as Ali does. Normally now, Liston just goes bang, bang, he's knocked out. And there's no talk about ointment or anything. It's a celebration. Away you go. Not with Ali. Look at him.
Mike, yeah, Mike, do you think just watching it here that Pete just said about how hard it would have been for Ali with the ointment and that in his eyes, do you think just watching it there that Ali's job or Cassius Clay's job was made a hell of a lot easier by Liston's inability to cut the ring off? Because if you watch him there, as good a fighter as he was, he doesn't know how to cut the ring off or refuses to cut the ring off.
No, he's just ambling and he's not placing his punches. He's just lunging with heavy shots. But how about the bravery on Ali to exclusively move into that dynamite right hand?
To get away from the hook.
He was before anyways. He's going back the other way now. But you see here, Ali always had that habit when he flicks a jab of moving to his left against someone as devastating a puncher as Liston. I guess maybe Ali felt he had better vision to be able to catch and counter the shot. But how frustrating would it be for Liston to be trying to walk after him and not be able to get off? And I think that, Sonny's struggling to cut the ring, but it's because heavyweights didn't need to really cut the ring in that era, as stupid as that sounds. No other heavyweight was moving like how Ali is. They couldn't sustain this for 15 rounds. They couldn't sustain it for 2-3 rounds. Like, no one had this kind of footwork at heavyweight. So, yeah, Sonny's ambling and just marching after him and not cutting the ring, but it's maybe because he didn't have to all his previous fights.
Yeah, fair enough too. And Tassie, just on that as well, one thing, I suppose the Achilles heel to somewhat the extent with Ali over his time was his susceptibility to a left hook. Obviously, Fraser dropped him with a hook. Cooper dropped him with a massive hook, which he was lucky to get out of. Do you think that maybe is why he's actually moving away from the hook in this, or maybe just coincidence?
Yeah, mate.
This fight was before those fights, by the way, the Ali, Fraser fight.
Liston could hit with either hand, so I mean he had a good hook, and maybe that's part of the reason. But the thing about Ali was Peter commented on, like how he got through the limit in the eyes, the eyes for a while, and someone like Liston in front of you. Ali had the biggest heart ever. I mean,
and chin.
If they would have done an autopsy on him and had a look at his heart, I reckon it'd be phenomenal because, later in his career, we've seen the heart that he had by taking blows against Foreman and Fraser to tire him out to win the fight. I mean, his heart was next level. At this time in his career, people thought he was just a pretty boy, big mouth. He was tough. He had the best chin. He got his jaw broken versus Ken Norton, and he came back. And I mean, people don't really comment on how he was a fighter. He might have been a pretty boy and a good dancer. Ali was a fighter. He was tough and the biggest heart, unlike none we've ever seen in this sport.
Well, Pete, there was the controversy after this fight. Obviously, it ends at the end of this round with shoulder. Now, obviously, the official line was that he tore tendons in the shoulder and had to retire. But apparently one of his cornermen were actually interviewed on the sly and said that it was all just made up so that he would get the rematch with Clay or Ali. What do you make of that?
Look, at the time, Liston went in a heavy favourite. He thought it was going to be a walk in the park, and he just didn't believe the hand speed, the movement, and also the counter-punching of Ali. Ali landed some massive shots on him coming in, and you could see Liston's starting to wear and tear, and he just wasn't used to it. I just think he lost heart in the fight. I think he didn't want to go out there because he knew there was another, 8-9 rounds of that. Ali wasn't slowing up, especially once the ointment walked out. Look at Ali dancing. I mean, he can go 20 rounds that night. Is he going to keep copying that for 20 rounds? No. He just said, that's it for me now. I'm calling it a day. I have a rematch. It's probably going to sit better in the rematch. But, we just witnessed probably one of the, not the greatest boxer, probably the greatest sportsman of all time. And also the political effect he had. He had guys like Malcolm X. I mean, after the fight, they said Ali went to a hotel room with Malcolm X and a few other high-powered figures and ate ice cream. That's all he wanted to do. And he sat there till midnight. There was no beer celebrations. And he was going to find Islam and become a Muslim and change his name. Because obviously he was Cassius Clay Jr. His dad was Cassius Clay Sr. So he was going to go to a different path that night, and he saw the vehicle to do it by defeating Sonny Liston. Because it wasn't just a fight for him, it was a message of what he planned to do. And you go through Ali's life, I mean, rebelling against Vietnam, whatever he had to do, he always was a straight shooter that did the right thing. And that was Muhammad Ali. So not only in sport but in life in general as well. Never. I mean, obviously,
Mate.
his weaknesses with women and all that, and he had mistresses everywhere and kids everywhere. But big deal. He's a heavyweight champion of the world. We won't comment about that. But just as a political figure, he wasn't just a sportsman. This guy made a stance against everything.
Peter, he was that powerful. They sent him over to Iraq to organise the release of hostages with Saddam Hussein. Now that's massive. He went over one-on-one with Saddam Hussein, and he got the American hostages at the time released. So that's the power the man had. Above boxing, he went over to face Saddam Hussein, and the American knew Ali's loved by everyone and being a Muslim, and he got it done, and he got the hostages released. So that's the power of the man. To go a bit more on what Peter said, he was larger than life. I think not about sport. He's the most specialist man that's ever walked this earth, in my opinion.
Sorry, Pete.
So, Tassie thought I was being disrespectful to Sonny Liston. I wasn't being disrespectful to Sonny Liston. We were comparing Sonny Liston against Cassius Clay. Everyone's going to be disrespectful against Cassius Clay. If you put Liston in anywhere else, I mean, I always say this. We as matchmakers, we talk boxing. I say, if you get a guy who runs 10 seconds and I put him with a guy who runs 12 seconds, it's going to be a mismatch. But if I get two guys that can run 12 seconds, I'm going to get a good race. Doesn't matter one's better than the other. They both run 10 seconds. Ali could run 9 seconds. That was the difference. He beats everyone. So I'm not being disrespectful to Sonny Liston.
No, Peter.
Liston,
in my opinion, Liston would have beat Tyson and Rocky Marciano. They were too small. Styles make fights, and I believe.
I don't know about Marciano, but I reckon he would have went close to beating Tyson. I don't know. Marciano's a big call because Marciano was a beast and he was inhumane.
Well, that's definitely an argument for another time. My personal opinion is, I suppose you could throw up in the air, in my opinion, what would happen between Liston and Tyson. I actually think, in my opinion, the Marciano fight would be a very early fight for Liston. I think he would absolutely demolish Marciano, but that's because he's just way too small. But that's just my opinion. But that's for another time. Mike, final word to you. So, what do you make of all the controversy about the mafia and the shoulder and all the rest? Then, of course, the rematch as well. You can explain as well.
If he injured his shoulder, it's because Ali, as Peter said before, accurately was making him miss by 30 centimetres. And he was lunging and reaching and throwing off balance. So all the credit belongs to Muhammad. I feel like historically the two Liston fights frustrate me a bit because there's people that suggest that Liston quit in the first bout and then suggest the second bout was fixed. Irrespective of what anyone wants to believe, you can't take away the accomplishment from Ali. He beat the man who was the man and was probably the most fearless, or most feared, I should say, heavyweight of all time. That's the reality. So I think that when you look at this fight in context, it really was the birth of the champion. Like you guys said, I don't rate Ali the greatest heavyweight of all time, or the best heavyweight, I should say. I rate Joe Louis the best heavyweight of all time. But I think Ali is the greatest boxer if you measure greatest in terms of contributions to society plus the fighting. I think Ali, it's immeasurable. Greatest athlete of all time, period, on that kind of measure. Greater than Jordan, greater than anybody else, because he had a bigger social voice than all of them. And I think that when we look at this fight, and I'm happy Pete chose it, because when you look back on this fight, the reason we all talk about Muhammad Ali and the man he become all stemmed back from what he was able to accomplish against Sonny Liston in their first bout.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it was the start. Oh, very well said, by the way. It was the start of, obviously, as you said, Ali or Clay/Ali's career. Liston, though, was probably his last real shot at it, apart from the rematch, of course. He actually went 13-0 with 12 knockouts before he lost to, Mike, you'll be able to tell us, Leotis Martin in 1969. Finished off with a 9th round stoppage of Chuck Wepner in 1970. So he didn't really go into obscurity, but that was his last crack, apart from the rematch at the big time, which is a real shame, isn't it, Tassie? Especially, the way you look at him, that he never really got another chance to redeem himself.
Yeah, look, as I said, You know, he did go on a winning streak, and I think the fight was fixed, and he was meant to lose, but he knocked that he won the fight, and I believe the Mafia knocked him. It's in my heart. It's what my father believed, and obviously, you know, my father's words gospel to me, and I believe that they knocked him, and that's, I'll take that to the grave. I believe the Mafia killed Sonny Liston.
Yeah, either way you look at it, it's a real shame. So still on you, Tassie, mate. We're back to you next week. Have you? I think so, Pete. I think we're back to.
Yep,
No,
it's me, baby.
I was last week.
Oh, you were too. Sorry, Tassie. So have you had to think about who's up next?
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I told Mike the other day. Oh yeah. So it's pretty much a two-fight. They had two. I want to vote Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank.
Oh, good fights. Yeah.
They had two fights.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Is that cool?
Yeah, love it. Plenty
A
to.
bit of English.
Yeah.
A bit of English theme.
Yeah, no, it was probably the most spiteful English rivalry of all time, wasn't it?
I know Mike wanted Wayne Ryan versus Harry Greb. But, yeah.
Maybe next time, Mike, we'll give you another crack at it before you leave in a few weeks' time. But guys, hey, love the episode. Normally this type of debate is for dream fights, but I love the fact we've got into it in a classic fight. So
Good on you, Peter. Good on you, son.
Good on you, Tassie, just keeping you on your toes.
Punching, mate.
Nah.
Keeping you on your toes.
very well said, guys.
Carlton's looking good. Carlton's looking good this year.
No, very well said by both arguments from you guys. And Mike, as always, mate, love the extra input and knowledge that you bring to the segment. So, guys, that's it for this week. Next week, look out for the Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank duology, we'll call it. And look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, guys. We'll see you then.